Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nat King Cole there, his unmistakable voice to start our service today. Good morning and welcome as we come to honour and commemorate the life of Peter Lawton. The support shown to Peter's family over recent weeks and especially over the past few days has been very much appreciated. To those of you who are joining us via internet streaming, we thank you for your online presence. We understand that so many of you would have been here with Peter's family and lending your love and support in person had circumstances not been as they are. There are so many extended family members who are also having to join us via streaming due to those restrictions currently in place. We know and appreciate that all of you are with us in spirit as we remember Peter today. It was almost a year ago that Peter sat in this very chapel as we said farewell to Trish, his loving wife of over 60 years. And although we now find ourselves in a very different world, we will now nonetheless pay tribute and reflect on the life of Peter in the best way that we possibly can. The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when those hands will stop, at late or early hour. To lose one's wealth is sad indeed, to lose one's health is more. To lose one's soul is such a loss that no man can restore. The present is our own, so live, love, toil with a will. Place no love in tomorrow, for the clock may then be still. As a man who had made clocks, Peter would have an intricate knowledge of the workings of those timepieces. And although he would have had some command over their longevity with his care and maintenance, like all of us, he had no command over his own. Time can be a slippery thing. As a child, the evening before going to bed on Christmas Eve or even before a birthday can seem like an eternity. And yet, when it comes to the loss of a loved one, regardless of how many years or even decades we have had with them, it is still never quite enough. Peter was a man of his family and a loyal friend, and it is as a community of family and friends that we come together and lend our support to Peter's family. Those shared years of family ties and special friendships now come into their own as they hold and sustain Peter's family, albeit from a distance. And so it is today that we come together to remember the life and time of Peter, to recall those special moments and significant events which have formed the basis of his happy life, and to say our final farewell. When we come to commemorate the lifetime of a loved one, we take a step back in time and make our way along the eras through which they have lived. And as we venture back, we take in those significant events or experiences which have marked the twists and the turns along the way. So let us now take a look back and hear the life and times of Peter. And to be our guides are his son Anthony and daughter Kerry, and I would now like to invite them forward to share Peter's lifetime with us. Thank you both.
Hello everyone. Dad, or Peter to many of you, was born on the 10th of June 1934 in Manchester, England, the first child to proud parents William and Elsie, with blonde hair, with the Lawton eyes, just like his father. He was the oldest of 4 children, Pat, Anthony and Carol. Dad's father, William, owned a butcher shop, and he once told his son to give his mum sheep's eyes as a birthday present. Maybe this is where Dad got his sense of humour.
In 1938, Dad's father joined the Air Force. The family moved to Blackpool, where Dad went to primary school. England was now in the midst of the Second World War. With his father away, Dad remembers walking over a railway bridge with his mum when a German plane shot at a passing train. They lay down and covered their heads until it was over.
Dad attended a Catholic secondary school in Blackpool. Mass was daily and held in Latin. This set a precedent for not attending church because when we were growing up, Dad would always say, "I don't need to go to church anymore, as I spent so many times when I was at school, I've reached my quota."
Ambitious as a young boy, Dad bred mice and sold them to the local pet shop as live snake food. He was once travelling by tram to see a friend with some mice in his pocket. One escaped, which created hysteria with all the ladies on the tram. Distance never set Dad back from being where he wanted to be. He would often ride his bike from Blackpool to Manchester, about 80 kilometres, to see his Auntie Marion.
In 1948, and with an interest in the outdoors, Dad joined a climbing club with his best friend Peter Bottomley. It was founded by the local priest Thomas Pearson. They stayed at an old cottage toward the top of Dunmail Rise in the Lake District. Dad has fond memories of his time spent with his friends, including the experience of his first cider in Grasmere. He did return to that pub for another cider with Mum 60 years later. That's quite a long time between drinks.
In 1950, at age 15, Dad's world saddened with the sudden death of his mum from diabetes complications. Thomas Pearson, now an auxiliary bishop, and out of respect for his dad and his family, insisted on delivering the service. At the time, this was a big deal. Dad recalls the event as though it was yesterday. Not being allowed to attend the burial and knowing he must now look after his brother and sisters, he walked them home and his life changed forever.
Dad finished the school term and the family moved to Birmingham. He didn't return to school. Instead, he got a job with an insurance company, General Accident, Fire and Life. His father, with 4 children to raise, remarried a woman called Nan. Dad didn't think much of his new stepmother and, as he tells it, ran away to sea.
He completed a 3-month sea school course and then he marched up and down Leadenhall Street in London, where all the sea companies were, looking for a job. With determination, he was offered an officer cadetship with Anglo-Saxon Petroleum, a Dutch company, and he set off for sea. Being analytical, Dad enjoyed the sea life, learning how to rig a ship and navigate with a compass and sextants using mathematical tables. Dad got to travel the world. He had a pet marmoset monkey, and in one tropical port, he was asked if he would like to buy a shrunken human head as a souvenir. Intrigued, Dad was led down a few narrow jungle tracks, and after a while started to feel uneasy. He politely declined the offer, with the thinking that if he went any further, it might be his head that was going to be shrunken.
Dad completed many of the officer exams on the ship, but there were a few that needed to be done on shore. Needing more money for sea school, Dad left the ship temporarily. He wanted to study architecture but couldn't afford to go to university, so he got a job at Bakelite Industries in the lab, who paid for him to go to night school and study to be an industrial chemist. After about 6 months, he was told he had only completed mathematics and also needed chemistry and physics. This meant he would need to repeat the year before he would get his degree.
It was during this time Dad met Trish at a local church dance. Now with a lovely girl by his side, Dad wanted a little more structure, so he left his studies and got a job in insurance with Norwich Union. They dated for a couple of years, Mum whizzing around on the back of his BSA motorbike. He used to joke and say, "We couldn't even sneak in a kiss as your Nana was always waiting for your Mum watching out the window."
Dad bought Mum's engagement ring with the sale of his BSA motorbike and married Trish on the 7th of February 1959. But on that foggy winter's day, Dad's mind was very clear. He was going to love this girl forever.
The newlyweds bought a house in Wolverhampton, and 11 months later, on the 4th of January 1960, they had a beautiful curly-haired little girl, Tracy Ann. Wanting more for his family, Dad saw an advertisement for a job in Australia in a magazine, and he headed down to London for an interview with National Mutual, not expecting to be successful. On the second interview, he was told that he had the job if he was able to be on a ship that left in 3 weeks.
Dad said telling Mum's parents that he was taking their daughter and granddaughter across the other side of the world was difficult. However, Mum, Nana and Grandpa knew it was an exciting opportunity that could change and enrich their lives forever. Within those 3 weeks, Dad did manage to sell the house, and they packed up all their things and boarded the Orangi with their little dog Kimmy for a 6-week journey to Australia.
For the first few months, they lived in a company flat in South Yarra. Arriving just before Christmas, our clever Dad built his little Tracy a wooden rocking horse and a doll's bed, which were so well made that all his children have used them, including grandchildren, truly standing the test of time.
After a couple of months and wanting more space for Tracy, Dad rented a house in Hughesdale, and working hard for the next 12 months, he saved up enough money to deposit to buy their first Australian house in Mount Waverley.
It was 1962. Dad was a 28-year-old young man in a new country with a beautiful wife, a 3-year-old daughter, a house in the suburbs, and was now a proud father to his first son, little blue-eyed Anthony Peter.
Not long after I arrived, Mum's parents, Winifred and Elijah, migrated to Australia to be with their daughter and family, living in the Mount Waverley house for a few months before they could buy their own home. Years later, Dad would tell the story of how he had always planned to return to England after 2 years when his contract was finished, but once Nana and Grandpa turned up, he was stuck. This was, of course, bittersweet, as Dad loved Australia and always picked Australia to win when playing against England in the cricket.
Taking a more lucrative job with another insurance company, Stenhouse, in 1965, another little girl with blue eyes like her mum was born, Jacqueline Karen.
Suburban life in Melbourne was wonderful and family beach holidays to Phillip Island had begun. Dad's hard work and devotion to his growing family were starting to pay off, so much so that he even extended the house to make room for their fourth child, a little girl with the Lawton brown eyes, Kerry Jane, who he nicknamed Cheeky Charlie.
In 1975, Dad returned to England with his brother Anthony to see his father, who was dying. Unfortunately, his father passed away a few days after Dad and Anthony had returned to Australia.
With the love of Austins, Dad purchased an Austin 7 Ruby for Mum. On the weekends, Dad was always in the garage. He rebuilt a 1928 Austin 7 Chummy from scratch, collecting all the car parts and making them for himself if he couldn't buy them. If he wasn't tinkering with the car, he was building or fixing something around the house. He actually built the garage himself around the Austin 7, as you can see in this picture. He also made a new kitchen for Mum, a deck on top of the patio, and even more toys for his girls, including a doll's house and a little wooden oven. He even put an old Austin 7 steering wheel in the ground so we could go for make-believe drives in the Austins. Gee, I look cute there, don't I?
Although at work all day during the week, Dad would always be at the head of the table at dinner time. If you had finished your dinner and pudding, you could leave the table, or sometimes you could stay and sit with Mum and Dad as they enjoyed cheese and biscuits with a glass of port. These were the times that Dad would try to make you taste all the stinky cheeses, which would make us run away, or if you waited long enough, you might even get to sip the dregs of the port glass. Blue cheese is now a favourite for all of us. Thanks, Dad. It was at the dinner table that as the head of the family, Dad would often announce some exciting news, like, "Kids, we're getting an in-ground pool, and we're going to England to visit your cousins." With the news of the England trip, Dad pinned up a world map in their bedroom and gave Jackie and me little red aeroplane stickers to stick on each time he had saved some more money. Not long ago, I asked Dad about how he saved all the money for this trip, as I loved those little aeroplane stickers, and he said, "I didn't. I borrowed the money. I just created that for you to get excited about."
June 1979 had finally arrived and Dad was about to take Trish, kids and mother-in-law back to England. We were like the Waltons, all crammed into a Toyota Hiace camper van as Dad drove us all over England, introducing us to our extended family and sharing with us the many places that were special to them.
If there was ever a man that did everything and more for his family, it was our Dad. Wanting the best for his children, he worked additional shifts so he could send us all to private school. With his family growing up, Dad sold the Mount Waverley house in 1981 and moved to a
Bigger house in Glen Waverley.
It's okay. Dad loved music, and just like his father, we grew up listening to him playing the organ and the piano, from jazz to blues. Glenn Miller, Fats Waller and Louis Armstrong among his favourites. Wanting all his children to learn music, we were all sent for organ lessons, but eventually it was only me who continued. The day before Dad died, we were talking about music and he said, "The organ is underappreciated." I know its melodious tones always reminded Dad of his father, who he inherited his love and talent for music.
Now General Manager with Australian Eagle, Dad travelled extensively with Mum to many places: Singapore, Hong Kong, Bali, Thailand, Hawaii and the big island Oahu. There, flying into a volcano in a helicopter. Tahiti, Bora Bora, Nairobi, Harare, 10 days in the Masai Mara Game Reserve in Kenya, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Rome and Paris. Dad had even kept in contact with his old school friend and visited him in Cape Town, South Africa in 1983.
Dad loved cars. He travelled with his Land Rover through the outback, but it was in the 1928 Austin 7 Chummy that he took Mum around Australia. From riding camels on the beach in Broome, exploring caves in the Kimberleys, their baby Austin took them everywhere, down the Inaminka track, the Flinders Ranges, Brisbane to Woomba and Maroochydore. In fact, the Austin 7 covered more remote outback roads than the Land Rover ever did, and it has been the friends from the Austin 7 Club that made those adventures and memories for Mum and Dad even more special, many of whom would have loved to have been here today.
It was the mid-80s. We were all growing up fast. Our proud dad walked daughter Tracy down the aisle and welcomed his new son-in-law, Alan. Dad started working for himself during this time, but was about to be given the best title of all, that of grandpa, to his first granddaughter, Rachel, followed closely by his first grandson, Brendan, just 2 years later.
In 1989, my brother Anthony was getting married in England, so Dad took Mum back to the UK and welcomed Nikki into the family.
In 1992, Dad walked daughter Jackie down the aisle and welcomed Ian into the family and his home so that it would help them save for their first house.
Dad wore the title of Grandpa as it was supposed to be worn, with love and funny jokes, and those grandchildren just kept on coming. Elise was next, followed by Max, Emma, Rebecca, Tim, Sarah and Hannah. There are so many photos of Dad with all his grandchildren as babies, bouncing and pulling funny smiley faces at them. He was smitten. Dad had a dry sense of humour, and anyone that knew him has no doubt heard the Dad-style jokes over and over. He would insist that he knew a girl called Therese Green and Lydia Dustbin, and that one of his best friends at school was called Sydney Herbert Isaac Taylor, waiting for them to work out the joke, being in the initials. Once in the car with Jackie, we saw some workmen laying bitumen on the road, and Dad said, "Look, girls, they're laying down thank you." We knew Dad was telling a joke, but we didn't get it. Over an hour later, Dad said, "Bitumen, tar, thank you."
Terrible joke. In the early 90s, and because our nana had moved in with them, Dad bought a bigger house in Narre Warren North on an acre of land with an even bigger 6-car garage. The Austins were growing in numbers. Dad had bought Mum a 1930 Austin 7 Chummy and was also rebuilding an Austin 7 Special, hand-making the meticulous wooden frame. Dad's skill with his mind and hands was incredible, and his perfection didn't stop with vintage cars. He made all the children a beautiful wooden clock for their 40th birthday, from the precision of assembling the movement to fashioning the wood. Each of them has a story or memory behind them.
When our Nana, Dad's mother-in-law, bought a unit in a retirement village, Dad downsized to a house in Berwick. While he respected our Nan, he loved telling Mum that her mother had tried to poison him when she accidentally put a slice of tomato in his cup of tea instead of a piece of lemon. In 2012, 3 generations of Lawtons set off for France to follow the Tour de France. Dad, Anthony and Max travelled around in a camper van, stopping at each stage to watch the tour. I also flew over from the UK to join them and travelled with them for a week. The memories of sitting in the back of the bumpy camper van with Dad, trying to read the French signs, admiring the scenery and getting great wafts of the very ripe camembert in the warming fridge were priceless. On some days, Dad would wear out from all the walking, so when Anthony and Max were watching the race, Dad and I would sometimes sit in a cafe with a coffee or a glass of wine. These are the moments that matter. It was perfect.
A major highlight on this trip for Dad was being able to visit the gravesite of his great-grandfather, who was killed in World War I. That day in the military cemetery was very moving, as Dad also had a picture of his father with him. So there were 4 generations of Lawton lads there that day.
As the tour finished in Paris, I travelled over to France again and introduced Dad to Grant. This night in Paris was memorable as we polished off many bottles of red wine with a few cognacs to end the night. Little did any of us know that the next day, Grant asked Dad if he could take my hand while we were visiting Notre Dame Cathedral. Dad said yes, so he must have been impressed.
Dad walked his last daughter down the aisle the following year in 2013. He not only gained a 3rd son-in-law, but another granddaughter, Molly, and 3 years later, the youngest grandchildren, William and Elijah.
In 2016, the lovely Michelle joined our family, along with Eve and Mitch, to make 14 grandchildren in total. As I stand here today, I look across at another special little girl. She's on her way. When Emma showed her grandpa the baby scan a few weeks ago, he could clearly make out the image and with the proudest smile said, "It looks like she's in a pram." Sadly, Dad wasn't able to stay long enough to take on the title of Great Grandpa, but he could not have been any happier for Emma and Jonathan.
Dad, Peter, was a generous man, a man who would listen, who loved his many Austin 7 Club and Rotary friends. It's so sad that due to that virus, we cannot all be here in person to celebrate and tell stories about his life. But when it came to stories, Dad was unique. Most people tell a story in a linear fashion, but our Dad loved to tell a tale. Dad would start with a brief overview of the context, followed by the start of a story. It would always contain loads of detail, and there would always be some additional side story that had to be explained. But hang on, the main story, plus something else, just to be remembered. Or was there? And where was I? What was I thinking about? He would then realise his story is a bit long, and then he would wrap it up and finally get to the point and get to the end of the story. I think Tracy has been lucky enough to inherit this grand way of relating a story. But all joking aside, Dad really loved nothing more than spending time with Mum.
On that foggy day in February 1960, when Dad saw clearly and said that he would love his wife until the end, he meant it. Through Mum's illness, Dad continued to care for her in their Berwick home, as he couldn't bear to be apart. However, eventually he knew that to care for Mum the best way he could was to give her the specialised care that she required. It broke his heart, and in his words, when he signed the paperwork, he said, "It feels like I've just signed away my wife."
Our Dad was in love with his Trish from the moment they met. His life would always be where she was, and he spent every single day visiting Mum in the nursing home. Sadly, she left us all last October. Some of her last words are now cherished recording. "That's your Dad and I. We will never leave each other, ever."
Mum, you were right. You're Peter, our wonderful Dad. A loyal, loving man, a true gentleman in every sense of the word, who always did the right thing by everyone. An ambitious man who taught us, if it's too hard, try and try again and never give up. That you can achieve all you want to achieve, but most importantly, to love and look after your family, as they are the centre of all that you are.
Dad, you are loved by so many. Thank you for everything you gave us, your wonderful life.
Thank you to Anthony and Kerry for painting that wonderful story of Peter's life, and we can see how much work had gone into that, so thank you so much. From the beginning of time, the flame has kept us warm and provided us with light. It has also been the basis of great symbolism in the realms of human ritual and ceremony for millennia. The flame has been known to signify purity, strength, and especially remembrance. We have heard of the story of Peter's life, a life in which you have all played your part. So let us now take a moment to reflect on the times which you have been able to share with Peter. And as the music plays, his grandchildren will come forward and light candles in honour of his memory and in memory of his loving wife, Trish. You may choose to say a silent prayer or simply reflect on your own memories of Peter and the memories of others who have walked the path along which Peter is now set to follow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And as our candles continue to cast their light over our time together today, they serve to remind us of our commitment to Peter's memory and to the memory of other loved ones who have also gone before. As we've heard, a lifetime is made up of experiences, but it is also made up of those special aspects of character and personality which make us all the wonderfully different people that we are. And to share in some of those special facets of Peter and to recall on some of their favourite memories of their grandfather are his grandchildren. And I would like to begin by inviting Peter's granddaughter Rachel and son-in-law Alan, who will be sharing some memories with us. Thank you.
Everyone that knew Grandpa knows how special he was. He put the gentle in gentlemen. He loved his music and really encouraged Brendan, Elise and I in our piano playing, even gifting us keyboards so we could practice when we moved out of home, which I was never very good at, sorry Grandpa. As kids, Grandpa was always playing practical jokes on us and teasing us. He had a wonderful sense of humour, though sometimes his jokes were a bit confusing or alarming to us kids. Getting older, I still love Grandpa's sense of humour, which was sometimes a little on the darker side, and I think I've inherited that from him. I got to spend a lot of time with Nana and Grandpa as the oldest grandchild, sleepovers as a teen and going over for dinners as I got older, always accompanied by red wine. Later on it was me cooking the dinner, but the red wine was still there. We always gave Grandpa red wine for birthdays and Christmas. I felt bad for always giving him the same thing. But then one year the family all put in to help in the garden for Christmas, and a few months later he was complaining that he'd run out of red wine as he hadn't been gifted any that Christmas. So Elise and I bought him a boxed mixed dozen for his birthday to stock him up, and he was a bit shocked when he got his present, but he did laugh. I feel so lucky for all the time we had together, and I appreciate that we were still able to visit him in his final months. But I'm also so sad that we don't get more time with him, and that Grandpa won't be at mine and Ben's wedding. I know he was excited for us. I'm so glad that Ben got to meet Grandpa to find out how special he was, and that Grandpa also got to meet Ben. Grandpa, words can't really describe how special you were to me, and nothing I say can do you justice. I love you so much, and I'm comforted that you are now with Nana, your beloved Trish, and you don't have to be separated anymore, or ever again.
This is from Brendan. Grandpa always made me laugh. It was one of his special skills for everyone. I think he could brighten any room with his sense of humour and good nature. For as long as I knew him, he was able to put a smile on my face. I probably learned some of my cheekiness from him. At the end of Jackie and Ian's wedding, the guests stood around in a big circle so that the bride and groom could go around and farewell everyone. I stood next to Grandpa, and as Jackie said goodbye to us, Grandpa leaned down to me and said, "Quick, run around the other side before she gets there and you'll get another goodbye kiss." So I did, and I said goodbye to Jackie a second time. I could then see Grandpa pointing to the other side of the circle, so I ran around again and waited for Jackie. This time she knew what was going on and said, "Oh, not you again," as she kissed me goodbye a third time. I ran back to Grandpa and we both laughed. I was 5. It's one of my first memories of us together and one of my most precious. Looking back, I think it sums up the kind of good-natured yet cheeky humour Grandpa enjoyed. I have memories of sitting in the back of his Austin 7 as we drove into the city with the Austin 7 Club. Memories at high school of opening my email during class and snickering at jokes he'd sent me. Memories of shopping together to buy a watch for my 16th birthday present. Countless conversations peppered with stories and jokes, and always with one of the warmest, most genuine smiles I've ever known. He always asked after my music, both piano and trumpet. I feel like he was one of my biggest supporters when it came to music, and he gave me enormous encouragement to continue playing. Always encouraged me to keep playing and not give up like he had given up. Grandpa, I don't play a lot these days, and I definitely haven't given up. Thank you for your encouragement, support, and making me laugh. I will miss you. Rest in peace. And then finally from me, this one's from Elise. It's funny to think of the time Grandpa spent working when we were kids, because what I can remember the most when I think of Grandpa are actually his hobbies. Austin Sevens, building cars, tinkering around, building or fixing clocks, and playing the piano, just to name a few. One of my strongest memories from the Narre Warren house, I think, is actually several of it. Sitting in the side room playing pianola or showing Grandpa what I'd learnt on the piano that week. But I think one of the best hobbies that Grandpa did for the rest of us was setting up our family tree. How lucky are we to have had someone actually take the time to go through and find out information about our family, who they were, where they lived, and what their lives might have been like. He did something for himself that will have a flow-on effect for us and will and for what will hopefully be generations to come. So we don't just remember or know Grandpa and Nana and Grandnan, but the family who they remember and beyond as well. But that's just the sort of person Grandpa was. He always had the time to sit down and listen to a story or to hear about what you'd done at school. He never seemed too busy for us, although I'm sure at times he actually was. He was just a loving and caring man who also happened to have a wickedly dry sense of humour or bending the truth, which as a kid was quite hard to figure out, but as an adult is something I'll always smile back on and remember. Grandpa, I hope that we can take a leaf out of your book to ignore the business in our lives and just enjoy the time we spend with our families. Thank you for being you. I love you and I will miss you.
Thank you to Rachel and to Alan for sharing those tributes on behalf of Elise. You may, and then Tim, we'll hear from Tim as well.
I haven't written anything. I just wanted to say what a great role model that Grandpa was, how great it was to have him growing up to look up to. You saw some of the photos of Dad and Kerry and I's trip around France and Belgium a few years ago, and those are some of my most treasured memories. Spending so much time with him and getting to go to the cemetery in France where one of his grandfathers was buried was, a fantastic, sad but amazing memory, and I'm honoured that I get to carry his names forward. So, I love you.
Much like Max, between the two of us, we haven't prepared much, but what we have prepared is what we know about Grandpa from being lucky enough to have him in our lives for so long. And I think if knowing Grandpa teaches you anything, it teaches you what was valuable to him and the value of being humble, the value of being appreciative to your family, the value of fixing things and learning things and being appreciative of things. And I think we can all take that away from spending time with him, and we'll always be grateful for that. And if it weren't for him, we all wouldn't get to be here today with each other. So we can always thank him for that. So thank you. We love you.
Grandpa, I look up to you in so many ways. The devoted husband you were to Nana, the dedicated father and grandfather you were to your children and us grandchildren, the hard-working family man, the real man that would do anything to help no matter what, and of course be there for his family. Some of my most cherished memories I have with you are the tours of your shed back when I was little. We would walk around the shed in order of each tool and machine and you would explain in deep depth how it works, how you got it, its backstory and its sentimental value. Me being, say, 5, I wouldn't really understand that well, but was always fascinated and interested in what you had to say, even if I was too young to appreciate it, as much as I do now. I remember one day when I was a bit older, instead of a tour of the shed, we went to a tool display shop. I have no clue where it was, but I wish I knew. Anyway, it was perfect because it had all types of old-fashioned tools with a description on a board underneath, though I would still get a more in-depth description from you, which I thought was cool. You always taught me the old-fashioned way with tools that generally required more skill and know-how first before explaining the newer way, which is something I'd take with me in everything I do. The memories of you and I talking about cars and how far they've come and what they were like back when you were my age, showing me a part that you've either custom built or refurbished and what it does. I love the 2 Austin 7s that you have and always love talking about them too. I remember when you took me for a ride on the freeway, and although it felt like the wheels were going to fall off and we would have to Flintstone it to the nearest service station, I thought it was heaps of fun and good to see you loving it as well. Later on, when I was 18, I drove to pick one of them up after getting things fixed, and I followed behind on the way home. I remember thinking how cool it was watching all the traffic pass us or slow down to have a good look at you driving this almost 100 years older car than theirs. I cherish all of these memories and forever will. The amazing grandfather that you were, the craftsmanship and skill set that you had, and of course a devoted, dedicated and hard-working family man are values that I will look up to and live by for the rest of my life. You truly are an inspiration to me. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Love you.
I just have a couple of little lines from Dad's youngest grandchildren, and it's a shame that, they came along later and didn't get to have all the many years that all the other grandchildren had. But they did have some special times. So this is from William, in his words. Grandpa, you are the wonderful person, and Nana, I love you. We've got your dog Priscilla, and she is funny. I'm taking care of Mummy. I remember you said to me, is there a more wonderful boy in the world than me? And you smiled. I love you to pieces. And this is from Elijah. I wish Grandpa couldn't die. I miss him and love him so much. I love when we talked on the phone. I remember our beds and our cots at Grandpa's. And I love that your name is Grandpa.
Thank you to all our speakers who have shared those memories of Peter as a grandpa. And to finish our tributes, I have a couple of others that I'm going to now read on behalf of them. The first is from Emma. Grandpa, I have so many fond memories of you. As a young child, I vividly remember sitting on your knee in the dining room, pointing to the photos of the past relatives and asking you who they all were. Your response was so in-depth. I enjoyed learning about all of your achievements and even your misfortunes, all of which shaped you into being the most gentle and doting husband, father and grandfather. I always loved how knowledgeable you were, always being so loyal when needing a helping hand, like when you drove me to school with my bike in the back of your four-wheel drive when I was a teenager. I truly appreciated that even though it may not have seemed like it at the time. As an adult, I recognised how strong-willed you always have been, and if you wanted something, you'd make sure, no matter how long it took, that you'd achieve it, which I strongly took on and still think of. However, the main thing that stood out the most for me was your devotion, fondness and warmth that you had for Nana. I truly admire the relationship you had together. That will be something I will never forget. Thank you so much for being you, Grandpa. I loved being a part of your amazing life. Love, Emma. The second one is now from Sarah. Grandpa, my fondest memories of you are playing on Auntie Tracy's tricycle from the 1960s. You cleaned it up and repainted it. I remember always having yummy lunch and playing hide and seek while Priscilla followed Hannah and I around. Grandpa was always loving and would tell jokes that I sometimes didn't understand. I love you very much, Grandpa. Love from Sarah. And our last tribute, and by no means least, comes from Hannah. Grandpa, when I was little, one of the things I enjoyed was going over to your house and would always look forward to a delicious lunch. I would spend time with you making funny jokes, or I would go outside where you would bring out an old blue tricycle for Sarah and I to play on. There are so many memories with you, like having sweets, or you would kindly get out the texters for Sarah and I to draw while you were in the lounge room with your cup of tea, sitting in the same spot that you had always sat at. Grandpa was one of the most adventurous people I knew because he travelled the world, and I hope one day I get to do the same. I will dearly miss you, Grandpa. Love from Hannah. It's a very special relationship between grandparents and grandchildren, and thank you all for sharing those memories with us. So let us now add some additional colour to our tribute to Peter's life as we see some of those special moments which have been captured in pictures. Those images through the ages of Peter, which are now locked in time and signpost his journey over his 86 years.
To talk with all by myself, no one to walk with, but I'm happy on the shelf. A misbehaving, saving my love for you, for you, for you, for you. I know for certain the one I love. I'm through with flirting, it's you that I'm thinking of. A misbehaving, saving my love for you. Like Jack Horner in the corner, don't go nowhere. What do I care? Your kisses are worth waiting for. Believe me, I don't stay out late, no place to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. A misbehaving, saving all my love for you.
The trembling trees embraced the breeze tenderly. Then you and I came wandering by and lost in a sigh were we. The shore was kissed by sea and mist tenderly. I can't forget how two hearts met breathlessly. Your arms opened wide and closed me inside. You took my lips, you took my love so tenderly.
The evening breeze erased the trees tenderly. Trembling trees embraced the breeze tenderly. Then you and I came wandering by and lost in the sight were we. Oh, the shores were kissed by the mist tenderly. Papa did in, I can't forget how two hearts met tenderly. Papa, that your arms open wide and closed me inside. You took my chops away from pops tenderly.
Oh, tenderly. Tenderly.
Some wonderful memories there through all the ages and eras of Peter's life. Peter was a man who was very clever with his hands. He had built clocks for all his children on the occasion of their 40th birthdays and restored his 2 Austin 7s from scratch, which were then driven on the many outings with Trish and the car club. He also completed many other projects around his home, including their kitchen. Over their various homes through the years, there have been many varied jobs and undertakings to which Peter had been able to turn his hand. He enjoyed restoring antiques, including the rebuilding and the restoration of a pianola. He also built many items for his grandchildren, such as dolls' houses and child-sized furniture. A generous man with his time and expertise, Peter also helped family and friends with their projects. His garage, which was his workshop, was kept in meticulous order. Everything was always in its place and the floor was swept with almost clockwork regularity. He was never one to sit still for long and always liked to keep busy, often with multiple projects on the go. As a few of you have already shared with us, Peter had a very dry sense of humour and he loved to make jokes with his grandchildren. And many of these took on the form of what we know as dad jokes. They still amused Peter greatly, even if his target audience was perhaps a little less appreciative. On one occasion, while joking around, he frightened his granddaughter when he suddenly appeared with a box on his head. Peter also enjoyed the BBC comedies of the Two Ronnies, Dave Allen and The Goon Show, and others of that era. The sharp wit mixed with a clever irreverence for which they were known certainly appealed to Peter. His creative streak came out in his projects and in his design, and also in his fondness for music, which has been represented here in our selections for today. He played the piano and had a liking for blues jazz music. This was an interest he had shared with his grandson Brendan and his daughter Kerry. Peter and Brendan had been learning to play pieces together from different sides of the world until the decline in Peter's dexterity prevented him from being able to continue. A man of his era, Peter always took pride in his appearance and was always well groomed. During his working life, he was always in a well-fitted suit and good quality shoes. Now, he was not vain. It was just a matter of personal pride and presenting one's best self to the world. Over the years, both Peter and Trish have had many good friends. Some of these friendships have endured over many decades. However, as the passage of time has marched on, they have had to say farewell to so many of them. As well as family and friends, there have been many four-legged members of the household over the years in the form of the much-loved family dogs. From his childhood, Peter always had a dog in his life, even bringing their poodle Kimmy when they made the long journey out to Australia. Priscilla, Peter's Chihuahua cross, who he now leaves behind, will soon take up residence in her new home with a family friend once Kerry returns to England. When we look back, we can see that the strong and abiding relationships with family and friends have been the cornerstone upon which Peter has been able to build his happy life. With his marriage to Trish of 60 years, Peter had found the perfect person to share his lifetime. Together they have crossed the globe and made a new life for themselves on our shores. They have weathered the storms of life and delighted in its rewards and its successes. Trish supported him in his career and created a loving home environment for their family. She also played an active role in his hobbies, sharing his enjoyment of their Austin Sevens and the social activities held with the club. When Trish became ill, Peter looked after her for a few years with the support of the family until she needed more assistance and medical supervision than what he could provide at home. When Trish went into permanent care, Peter visited her every day and ensured that she had all that she needed. This devotion to one another has endured throughout their marriage, and over their years together they have been able to see their family grow. Both Peter and Trish were very proud of their children. They were pleased to see them create the lives and the families which have now seen the next generation come into the world in their grandchildren. As a grandpa, Peter was thrilled with the relationships he was able to share with his grandchildren. And as they got older, he enjoyed engaging with them and sharing in their interests and activities. And although separated from some due to the tyranny of distance, he was pleased to see them whenever he possibly could, and he remained utterly devoted to them all. Peter was thrilled to know that in only a few months' time he was going to become a great-grandfather. And although he will never meet the first of this new generation of the family, he was able to see the images from the ultrasounds, and he took great delight in the knowledge that he was a grandpa in the making, a great-grandpa, in the making. These past few months have been very hard on families as separations from loved ones have taken their toll on us all. This is especially the case for residents in care facilities, as visits are currently under severe limitations. But thanks to Tracy and her husband Alan, Peter was able to remain amongst family until the very end. With the support of family, they have taken care of him when he was no longer able to remain at home on his own. And I believe that Peter would like me to take this opportunity to thank Tracy and Alan for this. From his time in the Merchant Navy and the holidays he and Trish had enjoyed over the years, Peter has been able to see a great deal of the world. In what was to be over 8.5 decades, he was also able to witness so much change throughout the 20th and now into the 21st century. Born during the years of the Great Depression, Peter was only 5 years old when World War II broke out, and so much of his childhood was spent in the shadow of these challenging times. Even as little as a year ago, when we gathered to honour the life of Trish, we could not have foreseen that Peter would be taking his leave of this world in the midst of another global crisis. Peter had grown up with the Catholic Church, and although he had not been a parishioner for many years, he still carried his faith in his own personal and private manner. He believed that he will be reunited with his loved ones, especially his wife Trish, as he now follows the same path almost a year after she has left this world. And so it is in respect of these beliefs that I now invite those who wish to join me as I say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thank you. To those family and friends who have joined us via the internet, we thank you for your virtual good company. We thank you for the support that you have shown to Peter's family and for the respect that you pay to Peter for having tuned in. And as we now prepare to bring our service in honour of Peter to a close and to say our final farewell, we thank him for all that he has brought into the lives of each of you. We thank him for the times that you have been able to share in his wonderful company. We thank him for his generosity of spirit, and most of all, we thank him for his unconditional love for his family and his friends. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May he rest in peace. Amen. May his soul and the souls of all the faithfully departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen.